Hey guys, this is Pastor John from Compassion Church Metro, having our monthly podcast. And today I am blessed to have a very close friend of mine today, Steve Ely. Pastor Steve actually started the church that I'm at right now. Over 17 years ago, he pastored for 16 years. He's the founder, the pastor of Passion Church. Before that, he actually served as the national youth pastor for the IPHC, and he now is the national clergy development director for the IPHC. And it's so good to have him on today. Pastor Steve, we want to welcome you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man. It's good to see you. It's
Good
good
to
to see anybody at this point. I've been sequestered for weeks on end, and I'm thankful for Zoom. I'd gone through a season where I was sick of Zoom, and now I'm kind of enjoying it a little bit again.
If you know anything about, I call Steve the Beast. Steve is always doing something. He's always moving. He's good at so many things. And I try to call Steve about every day just to check on him. And when I do, first words out of his mouth, I'm bored. I'm bored. He does not like being inside right now. So if I can, I wanted to do a podcast today as we talk about leadership, as we talk about being a pastor and a minister. What we do when we face difficult moments, when we get a report we are not expecting, when something happens that just came out of nowhere. And as leaders, as pastors, as ministers, what we do with that, how we handle that. And Pastor Steve, if you don't mind, if you would just kind of share what's going on and the news that you heard just recently.
Yeah. So, you know, before I tell them everything that's happened, I think it's one of the statements I've always said is I always hate it. I always hate it when God forces you to live what you preach. Um, it's a lot more comfortable when you can preach stuff that you're not actually going through and living. Um, but when, as a minister, when you're forced to face tough times, or you get bad news or a diagnosis or whatever, um, what, at least for me, what it's done is it's forced me to wrestle through whether I really believe what I've been preaching to everybody else. Um, I've come to the conclusion I do, but it doesn't make it any easier. It also allows you to recognize that just because you're sharing all this truth with people, that from your side, you're not going through what they're going through. It's comforting. You believe it's comforting, and it is. It's the truth. It's comforting. Um, at the same time, on the back end, the folks that are going through it, they know it's true, believe it's true. It just doesn't always make it easy.
Yeah.
It's still difficult. Um, Now, going through a difficult season with no truth would be even worse, but but it is difficult. So on for me, backstory like you talk about is I'm extremely active, um, high energy, type A driven, obsessive compulsive, whatever you want to call it. I'm always doing something. My mind never stops. I want my hands busy all the time. So came into the fall of 2024 after a difficult season. It was a difficult season. 24 was a terrible year. Um, Between Julie having a bout with cancer, two bouts with cancer, my sister suddenly passing away at 53, and then 70 days later, my mother-in-law passing away unexpectedly. So we roll into December of 2024, and I literally, this is scary now, but I literally had a thought one day in the house. I was sitting here, and I thought, kind of breathed a sigh of relief. And I was like, I'm thankful. It was in December. So, so everybody's doing the Christmas thing. And so we're kind of taking some days off. And I sit there and I literally remember thinking, we made it. We're going to be out of this year. And now we can, it's been difficult and it hasn't been any fun, but we've navigated it. There's going to be some rough days ahead, but we've navigated it, and life's going to go back to normal, and we'll be able to enjoy it. And then on December the 19th, long story short, back in May, I had some heart issues. And one of the things I thought was heart related was I felt like I had food stuck in my throat. And we'd kind of been monitoring that, trying to get it checked out. And my regular doctor scheduled me with a guy to do a scope, but they're so booked out that he wasn't going to see me until March of 2025. But from May until December, it kept getting worse. And so I just started bugging them. Plus, I started having a pain in my side, my left side, which was not normal. And so I just started bugging them, bugging them, bugging them. And long story short, through some pressure again from people, favor ain't fair. And in the medical world, I'm discovering it's who you know. If you don't know somebody, you're not going to get in. And fortunately for me, I knew somebody, and they got me in to a guy to do a scope in December rather than in March. And when we went in, I sat there in the little room where they put the IV in and stuff. And he said, "Why are you here?" I said, "Because I think I have a hiatal hernia. I think my food's getting caught in my throat. And then I think I may have an ulcer because I'm having a pain in my left side." And he said, "Okay." And he said, "No other conditions?" I said, "Nope, doing good." So we go into the scope, and when I wake up, he's standing over my bed, and and I like, I want people to be blunt with me. I don't want them to blow smoke up my rear. So I was kind of coming to, and I said, what's going on? He said, "You got cancer." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "You got cancer." He said, he said I had esophageal junction cancer. Um, Later, we discovered after some other tests and uh, procedures that I don't have esophageal cancer. I have stomach cancer, stage 4 stomach cancer. Um, and it's just like a blow out of left field, man. I don't mark any of the boxes for this. I have no family history of cancer on either side, um, no high risk lifestyle that would, like, the guy that did the scope kept looking at me going, "Are you sure you don't smoke? You've never smoked?" I was like, "No." And so it's just out of the blue. And so unfortunately with this particular kind of cancer, um, they don't normally find it until it's late stage because there are no symptoms, until you start having the swallowing issues. And so long story short, I'm in my third round of chemo now. I started chemo, my dates are all messed up now, but very shortly thereafter. I mean, when we found it in on December the 19th, I went and I had to have a tube put in my small intestine. It sticks out my side where I can take food because I couldn't swallow well enough to eat. So I have to feed on the tube. Um, so that would have been in December. Um, it was right after the 1st of January I started chemo. And so this next Wednesday, in fact, here in about 4 days, whatever that is, I'll have my fourth fourth round of chemo, anticipating doing at least five. And then they'll do a PET scan in between the fourth and the fifth just to see. So all that going on. So the large tumor in my stomach, fear of it in my lymph nodes, in and around the stomach. It looks like at this point, at least, and again, another thing about this cancer is it has a tendency to want to spread to other organs quickly. So they were really concerned about my kidneys and liver and all that stuff, pancreas, and all of it was clear. So it looks like for the most part, it's in my stomach and in my abdominal cavity. Um, but the other part that's kind of the sticky part for me is I have some kind of condition. I don't understand it exactly, but I can't even get the term for it right. But in layman's terms, they call it plastica something. I don't know. But what it means is my stomach is like hard plastic, and that's a problem. So normally what they would do is they would do 4 rounds of chemo, which again, I'm about to take my fourth. They would then wait a couple weeks, and then they would remove my stomach, and they would connect my esophagus to my small intestine, and I would just have to learn to eat differently, but much smaller meals. Um, but because of my stomach, this plastic condition, they won't touch it. So it's kind of a double whammy. I seem to be responding to the chemo because now I'm eating again,
Good.
and able to swallow better now. Uh, but now what? And that's what we've got to figure out is once they do that PET scan to try to determine next steps. So a lot of unknowns still about. what what to do and what's next.
Yeah, I want to say you just said something. You said, now what? You have to understand when Steve first got this diagnosis, and through the process, Steve's been so strong. To be honest with you, there would be times I would call him, get off the phone, and I would actually cry because I was trying to be strong for Steve and not cry. I know God's going to take care of him. It's just the fact that I knew what he's going through. In fact, one day I was somewhere. Oh, we invited Steve into a Zoom meeting that we were having, and or into a meeting we were having. He had to Zoom in. He couldn't be there. And as I'm introducing Steve and talking to the pastors, I just begin to weep, and I'm feeling bad because Steve's been so strong through all of this. You said that I heard something the other day. Stephen Furtick said this. He said, "The greater your mission, the greater your misery, but the greater your miracle."
Yeah.
You know, that really stuck out at me. Steve, you've had an amazing ministry. The lives that you've touched, the people that have been impacted. I now pastor the church that Pastor Steve used to pastor. It is a great work, and we thank God for what the foundation that him and Julie laid. And I see the lives that have been impacted because of your ministry. But when you said, what now? And it made me think of when Stephen Furtick said that, the greater the mission, the greater the misery, the greater the miracle. How, because we had talked one day about this, and you would discuss, I'm not afraid of what may be coming, but for ministers and leaders that are watching this, and you get that report, or you have that tragedy that may happen, or you're dealing with financial, whatever it may be, because so often we're on this side of helping others.
Yeah.
You know, we're on this side. In fact, right before I came into this meeting, I was in a Zoom for a funeral that I got to preach next week for a deacon that just passed away, and I loved him, very close to him. And as I'm in the meeting, and I think I said this earlier, I began to weep, trying to be strong for them, but I could not. And but most of the time we're on this side. We're dealing with
Yeah.
someone who's got the diagnosis. We're with someone who's going through a bad marriage. What do you say to those ministers? What do you say to them right now?
Well, so my mind's running because there's so many things that this has already taught me, but um, one of them I already knew, but it's been driven home even stronger through all this. This whole concept of us being strong for other people, as pastors, that we can't let them see us hurt is I honestly believe it's a lie. I think it's a trap. Um, I know there's a balance point where you can't stand in the pulpit every week and fall apart and expect your people to follow you and to see you as a credible leader. I get that. But they have to see you as human. And we deal with some hard stuff. If you have to bury somebody, if you a sickness out of the blue, a marriage is destroyed, whatever. We see the the thing about being in the ministry is you see the best of the best and you see the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
But what I keep seeing is I keep seeing pastors that won't ever let their people see them hurt. And what I can tell you is that in the seasons that I still call them my people, they're our people. Um, when they see us hurt, they suddenly realize that we're human,
Yeah.
and it makes it real. It makes them willing. They suddenly are willing to follow you. I believe at a different level of loyalty, a different level of submission's a scary word for people, but they recognize, I think what happens is they recognize this guy or this girl is actually, it isn't fake. They're not plastic. They're real. They hurt. They have feelings, but they're still going through. So that's the first thing is I think we got to let our guard down. I think if you're falling apart in the pulpit every week, I think you need a counselor anyway, but
And
that's a whole
can
another.
I talk about that real quick? Because
Yeah.
it's we have something called Encounter Praise Night. It's a night that we get together once a month, and it's just a praise night. And we just had ours recently. Something had happened. Someone had called me that week and spoken something to me, and it just threw me off tilt. I, I don't know why I didn't take it well. It didn't sit well with me. Someone had spoken something to me. And at the end of the night, the counter praise night, I get up and just a night of altar time, a night of just letting people come down. And, Pastor Steve, I got up there and could not minister. I
Yeah.
couldn't. It was in my head. And the more I tried, the more and many times at the altars, like on those nights, I really flow in words of wisdom, words of knowledge. And it just wasn't happening. And I finally just began to bawl. And I said, guys, I just got to be honest with you. Something happened this week. It's thrown me off tilt. I'm just not doing good. And, I just began to bawl. And two things happened. One is after I did it, really the Holy Spirit just began to flow. God began to speak some wonderful words that night. But it wasn't just that. It's something you said. It was for the days following, the congregation reaching out to me and saying, are you okay? Are you doing good? I love you, Pastor. People walking and just hugging me. If we're going to minister to people, and our job as pastors is to help disciple and to develop them, then we also need to develop and disciple them on how to minister to others, even us as a pastor.
Yeah, it's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
It's a two-way street. The Bible says that if the shepherd is struck, the sheep scatter. And so, but that's a two-way street too, is that most everybody wants to talk about the shepherd's responsibility of taking care of the sheep, and that's true. He's supposed to guard against the bear, the wolf, the lion, the whole deal. But it's reciprocal. It's a two-way street. The sheep have to take care of the shepherd because if the shepherd's struck, they scatter. So it's not either or. And I just see guys trying to be Superman and don't that old world enough to remember this. Don't ever let them see you sweat. Don't ever let them know that you hurt. It would do some of our congregations good if they knew we hurt.
Yeah.
It would do some of our congregations good for us to stand up in the pulpit sometimes and say, I don't have a sermon this week. I tried and I couldn't. I did my best. I did my dead level best. I wasn't lazy, but I don't have anything to say. And even if I said it, I don't know if I'd believe it. Or maybe you preach the message that you worked on so hard and then you stand up and say, I'm sorry, that was terrible. I'll do better next time. But just the humanity and the reality of it. So that's part of it. The second part of it, I don't want to miss. The second part of it for me that this is done, and again, this is not out of some framework that I hadn't already been operating in, but it's driven it home for me. If this hasn't done anything else for me, it certainly reminds you about what's important. So I'm gonna get emotional.
It's okay. It's okay.
Um, so at the end of the day, regardless of your pastoring 20 people or 20,000 people, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, when you get news like I got, facing prognosis that I'm facing, you you suddenly come to grips with what matters. The problem is if it takes the prognosis to come to grips with that, you're out of time. And fortunately, I think now there's some things I would do over, and there's some things I would do different. But for the most part, I was pretty diligent about putting my family first. That's why we planted the church. In large part was because I was tired of being away from my kids, and God was gracious to us and let us have 16 years of watching them grow up and be a part of everything they were involved in. And Julie and I doing ministry together, hand in hand, and all that. So I was pretty diligent about it. I don't know that I could have put family much more first than what I did, but I do know that when you get the kind of prognosis I got, all of a sudden, all the other stuff doesn't matter very much. And the truth be told, it's not just about family, it's about friends too. So if you test me out, I'm going to, and on the different ones, Enneagram, all these other things that tell you about who you are. One of the traits I have, Josh Hanna, who you're such good friends with, I'm friends with, he tells me it's my fatal flaw. And I finally came to grips with it and went back to him one day and said, if that's my flaw, if that's the flaw that's going to destroy me, I'm okay with it. He said, "You're too loyal." And he said, "That's your fatal flaw." Um, but what this has shown me is that you, you need relationships. So in my case, I got thousands and thousands of people praying for me, and I don't discount that or diminish that, man. We are standing on every one of those prayers. We're getting videos every day. I got a video today of 30 people standing in a circle praying for me. I will be eternally grateful for all that. But I'm gonna be honest with you. The only thing keeps me going most days, other than my family, is about 5 or 6 guys that I have, you being one of them, who calls me on a regular basis to see how I'm doing because I've invested my life. We've become so close, our souls are knit. And so I'm scared for a lot of pastors because they're not close to anybody. They may be close to their spouse or their kids, but God forbid what happens if that's the news you get is that you're going to lose your spouse and your kids. You got to have some people. It doesn't have to be a lot. In fact, I don't think it can be a lot. Jesus modeled it for us. It's the three. It's the three guys that when I'm like before I came on this call, I called one of my guys and I said, "Listen, what if the PET scan's not good? What if they say you can't do any more chemo? What what if their prognosis is correct?" I mean, you got to have some guys, some people in your life that you can have very difficult conversations with. And so this has driven that home to me that I'm thankful for the thousands of friends and the far reach of ministry. And I've done my best. It's been intentional to try to, and we all do, I think, because we all think we got the greatest message in the world, and that's fine too. But I mean, I've written books and done my own podcasts to try to get the message out there further. And we should. We work on our messages hard, so we should. I'm not making fun of that. That's we ought to be doing that. But at the end of the day, that part doesn't matter. Not really. Not really. Because at the end of the day, if the Lord chooses not to heal me and he takes me home, then my legacy will be wrapped up in a little boy named Talmadge and a little boy named Devin and some grandbabies and some daughter-in-laws and my wife and about 5 to 6 couples that we spent our life with that really knew me and still believed that I was worth being friends with and worth listening to at times. And so I would just say to the folks that are listening, don't wait for the prognosis because then it's too late. I'm very fortunate. I had a lot of this in place already. If I hadn't had this in place already, man, I'm gonna be honest with you, John, I'd have lost my mind because that's the third thing I found out about this. Going through difficult stuff as ministers, we preach this stuff all the time. We just don't have to practice it.
Right.
I've had to practice it, and it's hard. And that is this thing is mental. Um, the hardest battle I've fought this whole thing has not been physical. I feel fine. It's mental. It's taking every thought captive. It's learning to train your brain. It's learning to bring every thought under control. It's a mind game. And I thought I was pretty strong mentally when it came to that kind of stuff and not letting my thoughts wander and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to tell you, this goes back to the second thing I said, which was about those people in your life. What I discovered was I'm not as strong mentally as I thought I was, number one. And number two, you gain strength mentally by those people. It's those
Yes.
people. When I feel like giving up and when I feel like like I said, what now? And I don't have any answers, I call one of my guys and let them talk. And as they talk, I get strong and I get my thoughts back right and I start thinking correctly again, and start having faith again. So those are the three main things for me, for ministers. I wished I could tell every minister watching or listening that they weren't going to go through some tough times, but that's not true.
Yeah.
The late Dr. Carpenter said to me one time, he said, your level of greatness, and this is not an exact quote, but close. He said, the level of greatness in ministry will be determined by your threshold for pain.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think he's right. I wished he was wrong. Uh, so anyway,
You you
that's what
said
we're dealing with.
you said something I want to hit on real quick. You said that we preach it, but what happens when we have to practice it?
Yeah.
And I think that as leaders, many times as pastors, we haven't had to go through those moments. We haven't had to face the tragedies or the trials or the tribulations. And it's so easy to stand on that stage and preach the Word of God and talk about, well, God's always going to be there. We get that. But there is going to come a moment, I think, for all believers that you're going to have to face that moment. What I've been preaching, now will I put to practice? Will I
Yeah.
believe it? And I'll say this, another thing you said, and I say this all the time. Someone told me one time, said, when all of us one day are the end of our life, we will not say, oh, I wish I was in more
Yeah.
meetings.
Yeah.
I wish, I was preaching more sermons, or I wish. We will. None of us will be there. We will say, I wish I was with my kids more. I wish that I was with my
Yeah.
wife more. That was something in my ministry fairly early on. I told my church. Prime example, if my wife calls, I was in a counseling session this week, and somebody called me. I said, "That's my wife. I got to answer." I've always made it known my wife is more important. Um, Same thing with my kids. I went to all their sporting events and all their pageants and all of that. There may be times I was running in the door, but I was always make it known to my church. My family comes first. It's God first, family second, ministry third, job fourth, and on down that line. And I'm going to tell you right now, ministers, we will stand on the stage and preach against addictions and preach against sin. But the greatest sin that we're doing is to our family. It's like the man that
Yeah.
said one day, um, his father was a pastor of a big mega church, and he was living a pretty wretched life. And a reporter one day talked to him and said, for your father to be who he is, how in the world do you live the way you live? He said, you know my dad on Sunday, but I know my dad on Monday.
Yeah.
Well, that impact, and not in a good way, had impacted that boy. I will say this when you look at Steve and the impact that he's made. One is when he said, yes, this is still Steve's church, and they still love him and Julie. Second is when you look at his family, a wife that loves Jesus, a phenomenal worship leader. The kids, Devin and Tal. In fact, Tal and also very close friends, and Tal works in our creative department here and is doing an amazing job. They are godly men and a godly wife, and that is a reflection of a pastor who did not put the church first, but put his family first and church second. And I would say that to any minister that is watching right now, an addiction to your ministry is just as bad as an addiction to a substance or a drug or an alcohol. Your success one day will not be wrapped up in how big your church was or how many sermons you preached. The
Yeah.
success will be wrapped up in, did your children follow God? Are they in ministry? What does your wife think about you? That's what it's about.
Yeah. I even just recently, before we knew this was going on, I always take the sermons that I preach each year, I manuscript, and so since 2012, I've taken each year and made them into like a PDF book, and I give them out to at that time to the congregation, but over the last few years to my family. But this time in November, I had, I don't know why I didn't preach at our church as much in 2024 as I had been because I wasn't the lead pastor anymore. And so I didn't have as many of those to put together. So I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I think this year I'm going to take every sermon from 2012 to 2024 and put them all together as one large book and put it on a jump drive, a thumb drive, and give it out. So you basically have 12 years of all my sermons. I'm going to give those out to my family. So that's what I did, and had it engraved on the thumb drive, 2000, I think, I actually think it was from 2010 to 2024, so 24 years. And I didn't even put the 24 on it. I just put 2010 dash and left the 24 off, not knowing what we were facing. Um, but what I realize is that now, again, if the Lord chooses not to heal me, if cancer is what's going to kill me and take me out, whatever, I think my kids um, will cherish those manuscripts because they'll be able to hear me through those manuscripts. But at the same time, that I don't think that's as that's not what will be. It's not that it's not important, but it's not what's the most important.
Yeah.
What they'll remember more, and I hope cherish more, was us,
Yeah.
you know. And so for a guy, man, I'm a preacher. I love to preach. I love to listen to preaching. I like to write sermons. I like to study all that stuff. I'm a freak when it comes to that stuff. And there are guys watching that are too. And but you, if your identity becomes that and is wrapped up in that, and that becomes more important, you getting your message done, you getting your message out, people knowing your message, people preaching your messages, all that stuff. If that's it at the end of the day, well, then what happens when you're not around to develop any more messages? And what about your kids and your family? So to me, it's just about priorities, and you got to get it right.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what we learn from this is the fact that we so often in our lives wait to the last minute when something eventually has happened to make us realize, hey, wait a minute, this should be my priority. This should be my big rocks.
Yeah.
All the other things
You know
I need to
what's
let go.
crazy, John? Uh, just by accident, I'm not saying I got this perfect, but I'm thankful it's made this process easier that I'm not having to scramble right now, and I can actually be present with my family instead. Is because of what had taken place with my sister and with my mother-in-law and some other stuff, all that kind of stuff that you have to normally scramble to do, we had already done. So all my last words to my kids have already been written.
Mhm.
I have them in a safe. My funeral has already been planned long before we got months before we got this prognosis, who the pallbearers are going to be, who I want to preach the messages. All of that is already decided. And you say, well, that's pretty morbid. Well, let's fast forward then. Then in December, if you get news that you get stage 4 cancer, let's say they say you got 2 months to live. Are you going to spend your last 2 months freaking out over who your pallbearers are going to be and making funeral arrangements? And I got to write my last statements to my kids, all that stuff. If that you got to also factor in that a large part of my day now is dealing with medical stuff that I didn't have to deal with before. The routine is completely different. And I'm like, if I had to be worried about that stuff, I wouldn't even have time to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then you miss out. So I want to encourage pastors to to plan ahead. You plan ahead for your church, you plan ahead for your sermons, plan ahead for your family. There's two documents. I don't have the links here, but one of them's called My Five Last Wishes that helps your family. It costs, I think, $7. You can find it online. You buy it, fill it out, get it notarized or witnessed. Like John, you sign mine, and it's basically your advanced directive, but from a Christian perspective, and it tells exactly what you want it to be like. And then the other one that I stumbled across, and I wished I had the link. I found it online. Um, and I'm going blank on the guy's name, but it actually is a worksheet. It's 10 pages, about 10 to 12 pages long, and it allows you to work out everything, your obituary, your funeral, your who gets what, divide all that up. It does everything. And then the last thing it does, it has a list at the back of it, 40 things that the family should know or do after a loved one passes away.
Mm.
So again, this is really morbid sounding. Sounds
No,
like I'm
no,
sitting around in my house thinking about funerals all day long. I'm
no.
not. And the reason I'm not is because I did some planning. So before we ever got the diagnosis, I already had all that done.
Yeah.
And so when we got the diagnosis, I went back and tweaked some things, but it gave me peace of mind to know I don't have to spend my mental what little mental energy I have left right now because I'm fighting every mental battle I can fight. I planned all that when I was in a good space in my head. I can just leave it alone and it provides peace. And so just some simple little tips like that
Yeah.
most of the guys I talk to that are my age or younger. They haven't even given it a thought. They
Well, we,
haven't written one thing down.
we keep thinking we're so young. I thought about that the other day,
Exactly.
and we're not. I'm 54. You're 56. Is that correct?
I'll be 57. I'm 57. Yeah.
57. I want to go over real quick what you've said, and these are very important statements for individuals that are right now facing a difficulty in their life. First is this: you said, "What now?" It's not the good times that define who we are as a believer. It's how we handle the bad times. So
Yeah.
decide in your life now, what now? When something does come or something happens, remind yourself that I'm a follower of Christ. I'm a believer in Christ Jesus. And I agree with you, me and Steve. Steve has been so strong through this. And I know how difficult it's been for him, but he's been so strong. The second thing you talked about was your priorities. What's most important? End of the day, it's going to be family. It's going to be friends. And I want our ministers to hear this, because put your family first. Make sure you got friends surrounding you. I said this to someone. I have a lot of friends, but I've only got a few close friends. I know a lot of people, but I only have a lot of people who actually really know me, and I keep them close. And Steve's one of those. So make sure that you've got family first, friends. You've got that in your life. Here's another thing that you had talked about, and that is for us practicing what we preach. That ministers, you're going to have to eventually in your life go through this moment that what I have told others and how to be strong and hold on to your faith and don't give up on God. And what happens when you get there? And
Yeah.
that when you've got to practice what you've preached. And here's the last one that I got from you, Steve, and that was plan ahead.
Yeah.
You've got to plan ahead. So that in moments like this, I was on the phone this week with a church member that they had a family member that had passed away, and there was no will, there was nothing, and they're now left in a
It's
situation
horrible.
horrible. I
It's
mean, they're
horrible.
scrambling, trying to figure out what
Yeah.
to do, how to get things taken care of, and so again, planning ahead, and not just in this situation, but in anything in life.
Yeah.
How are you going to handle things? What are you going to do? And Steve, I want to thank you for coming on. You're an inspiration to us all.
Well, I
We love
appreciate the
you.
opportunity, and hopefully uh, this is just one of a two part, because I'm hoping the second part will be me coming back telling you how the Lord has healed me.
Amen.
That's what we need to happen,
Well, that's what we're
and I'm
believing
praying
for.
for. Yeah.
In fact, I want to tell everybody, me and my wife, we have it set on our phones every night at 5:35. I think it was Tal that had put it out there. Isaiah 5:35. Is that correct?
53:5. Yeah. By his
53:5.
stripes we're healed. Yeah.
By His stripes we are healed.
Yeah. Yeah. It
So,
actually was birthed out of a sermon series I preached, and my
mm,
own kid listened to it.
yep.
Um,
He
about
remembered that
standing,
sermon.
yeah,
He remembered
standing
it.
on the wall
Yeah.
of that passage and believing. Yeah.
So every night at 5:35, me and Lori's phone rings, and we stop right then and we pray, and we intercede. And I'm believing, just as Stephen Furtick said, great mission, there comes great misery, but out of that there will come a great miracle. And that's what I'm speaking over Steve's life. I'm praying for that. And I want to conclude with this, and I'll close. I was listening to a song the other day, and the song was talking about, it's from Katie Nicole, and I think Big Daddy Weave, and it's called God is in the Story. God is in the
Yeah.
story. And I thought about this is the thought that I had. Your storm and your situation is not your story. God is still writing it.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to say over you, that right now in the middle of your storm, that's not the end of the story. It's just a chapter. And we're believing that we're going to turn the page to another chapter. And God is still writing the story of Steve Ely and the plan that he has. And what I'm praying, what I'm believing, is I'm going to say, my friend got healed by the power of Jesus Christ. God is a miracle working God.
Yeah.
And Steve, I love you, man.
Love you too, man.
Pray
Appreciate you.
God's blessing on you. Love you, buddy.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for
Bye
letting me
bye.
be a part.